Yes, happy good afternoon from Berlin. I'm very delighted to be able to take part in this conference, and I want to thank the organizers again for making this a hybrid format, even though I know it still causes some kind of problem technical sometimes. So I'm going to present to you. I just need to minimize something here so I can see my screen. I'm happy to present to you the Handedness Profile, which is a multidimensional standardized assessment for clinical practice and research in a practice-based approach to handedness. So you probably haven't heard of a practice-based approach to handedness. It's best if I just introduce myself. Unlike many of the handedness researchers coming from archaeology and neurology and psychology, I'm actually an occupational therapist by training. And I studied occupational therapy in Cape Town. I'm half South African, half German. And I've been working with children with motor problems ever since. And parallel to this, I've also been an educator, teaching at universities, also motor development and those kind of things. And a researcher because I then started to take a great interest in handedness. So my master's and my PhD was on handedness, and I've been researching it since. So I've been very fortunate to have these three professional legs of being a practitioner as well as an educator and a researcher. They feed off each other, and they always forced me to translate theory and research into education and into the practice. So that's the kind of background to me. And currently I'm a professor at the Alice Solomon University in Berlin since 2005. And yeah, I think that's about it. Now, what is awaiting you? I'm first going to contextualize the handedness profile a little bit more, and then I will show you how it was constructed in the frame of the 5 studies that I did in my PhD. And then since then, I finished it in 2003, so 20 years ago, since then it has been developed a lot further, and this is what I will present to you after that. But it's not in isolation. This I'm not going to present, I'm just going to mention it. The handedness profile is actually linked to a whole typology as well, because it is an instrument for practitioners, for occupational therapists especially, but also for others who work with children with motor delays, etc. And they need support in what to do with the results of the handedness profile. So that is why over the years I've developed a topology, which I will not present. And then I will show you a case study using the handedness profile. So first of all, when I was working with kids, especially in Australia, I had a lot of kids that swapped hands, and that's a bit of a problem when you're working on motor skills and they don't know which hand to use. So for one, you can't train one hand properly. And the other thing that is even more important, when they go to school, they have to decide which hand to write with. And we know that if they write with the wrong hand, that can actually cause all sorts of further problems. So it's a big responsibility that's actually laid on the shoulders of occupational therapists, especially, which is why I took interest in researching this. And I had in the master's and PhD studies, did a very extensive literature review and my own research, and I was particularly looking for guidelines, what to look for when assessing handedness comprehensively, so that we don't just have sort of one side but that we know what we have is, or what we see is what we have. And also I kept coming across handedness groups like pathological handedness or switched handedness, and I could see things like that also in clinical practice. So what I've learned over the years is that handedness is an extremely complex construct or phenomenon. It's multidimensional, it's got multivariate influences, it's polygenetic. But for the purpose of a practice-based approach, we try and capture as many of the dimensions as possible. So I think it's all well acknowledged that preference and proficiency are both aspects of handedness or dimensions of handedness. And I think in the last 10 years, especially, the degree of handedness has become also more important than the direction, or at least research is focusing on that, because we see very interesting correlations also with conditions or other symptoms. But in addition to that, there's sort of more diffuse dimensions, which I call a function-related dimension that looks at whether we do things unimanually or bimanually, whether the things are skilled or unskilled to us, or whether they are proximal or distal. Whether we are practiced in it or habit. So those are kind of function-related dimensions. And then the task-related dimension also overlaps a bit with the environment, of course, where we look at tool use and also whether something is placed ipsilateral or contralaterally. So all of those things need to be considered. So as you can see, I've been hamstering over the years to see what is really important, and I try to sort of incorporate that into the assessment. Why this is important is that if we really understand why a child is swapping hands and what does it actually mean in terms of the type of handedness, we can then decide what kind of intervention to go for. Okay, so that's the background, and here you've got a more fancy way of what I've said just now. If you want to read that, I'm actually busy writing my first book in English on handedness. It will be, and this is a quote from that, as my definition of a practice-based approach. So the construction of the handedness profile, it consists of several subtests. So you see here a preference subtest, and I decided, especially for the switched handers, which might be doing trained things with the right hand, but untrained things with the left, that it's very important to actually differentiate between untrained and trained. So with these trained preference and untrained preference items. And midline crossing is a form of preference, but it's not synonymous, because we know that developmentally delayed children may cross over with both hands, and so they don't have a problem with crossing over, but they also haven't established handedness, or they avoid crossing midline, but if you place things in the middle, they will use one hand consistently. So it's related, but it's not synonymous. And similarly, bimanual cooperation is a more complex form of proficiency, one could say. So there are subtests that cover those 6 aspects. And then I have tried to collect from the research that recommends that you should assess things that your task should include unimanual as well as bimanual tasks, simple and complex tasks, distal and proximal, tool use, as well as just movement, and ipsilateral and contralateral. With distal and proximal, I mean musculature used. And then all of this is, of course, then measured with degrees of handedness using laterality quotient. So all of these subtests actually end in a laterality quotient, so we can see the degrees of handedness for each of those. But how did it all start? I actually started off doing a study with 5-year-olds, because I was first wanted to see what is the normal variability of preschoolers just entering school. So when I see a child swapping hands, it might be more normal, because it might still be developing. So at the time I was in Australia, and I tested 122 kids, 5-year-olds, using the Edinburgh Handedness Inventory, which is very well known, and I use it as a performance test. So I got the kids to actually do the items, and each item was performed 4 times, so I could see whether they would swap within the task. And I used 3 tests of the sensory integration and praxis test from AIRS, which is a very well-known test battery for occupational therapists working with kids, because they're standardized and then normed. So I thought that's a good idea. And I was surprised to find that it's actually that these tests didn't show me the variability that I was looking for. And instead I found ceiling effects for the preference and the proficiency tests, and floor effects for the midline crossing test and the bimanual coordination test. So I thought, okay, maybe I can reduce the ceiling effect by including some younger kids. And I can develop just new tests for midline crossing and bimanual coordination because they're too hard, and we need something that younger kids can also do. So that's what I did. And then I tested 90 typically developed 3 to 5 year olds using, again, the test that I've just mentioned. And again, I show these, even though they were younger age groups, the preference and proficiency test showed little variability. And I was really surprised at that, because I thought at least with 3 year olds, you would see more of that because handedness is still developing. Fortunately, the new test showed a much more normal variability. So then I decided, okay, let me now develop new tests also for preference and proficiency and compare the existing tests to the new ones, which is what I did. I took 60 typically developed left and right-handed kids. They were unambiguously left and right-handed as reported by both parents and teachers. And I did all the tests with them, of course, with breaks and biscuits in between, but I have to say they all enjoyed it. And it was, I could see, you can see the blue and the pink are the old tests, the distributions of the existing tests, and the new tests have got a more normal distribution and a greater variability. So I decided that this is a good basis to go on to develop the profile. So the next thing I did, I took the data of the third study and I constructed 8 categories based on percentiles to see, similar to what Annette did with her 8 categories. So 4 categories for left and 4 for right, using that normative data. So I had the top 25% I call the explicit left and right-handers. The middle 50% were the moderate left and right-handers. Then the third group was between the 25th percentile and the 10th percentile were the mild left and right-handers, and the bottom 10% were the variable left and right-handers. That is sort of the way I called it. And now don't get a shock, but here are all the profiles now as I mentioned them. I will show it to you in big as well, but all you have to think about is now the right side. Here are the 8 categories. So the green is the left, the yellow is in the middle if there's 0 difference between the hands. And then the red is for the right. So these are the 8 categories. And these are the normative, what I call the normative category profiles for each of the kids. So this is the top 25% of left and right-handers. If you just glance across, you can see that the left and the right, also for the moderate left and right-handers, they're pretty much the mirror image of one another. It becomes more interesting when we go to the mild ones here, although this is now pretty insipid, the mild left-handers, but look at the bottom 10%, the variable left-handers. They are so interesting. They are definitely left-handers because they right and draw with their left hand, but they do a lot of things, more things with their right than with their left. You don't see that with the variable right-handers. In fact, this is the only group that doesn't significantly differ from each other. You can see the mild right-handers and the variable right-handers. So the bottom 25% of right-handers are pretty much similar, but my personal suspicion is that there's a lot of variable left-handers that have good motor skills that have actually become right-handers, that have switched. They see themselves as right-handers. So I don't believe that this is a pure right-handed group, but that's of course a hypothesis. After that, I still did one more study. I wanted to see if I now compared atypical children with using the handedness profile, would they come up with different profiles? So is the handedness profile sensitive to pick up atypical handedness kids? And indeed it was. I included kids between 4 and 9 years because the categories are actually relatively age independent, because we know that we have degrees of handedness with adults as well. So what was interesting though is that 3 things came up that were significantly different. There were much more kids that had some results being more on the left and some more on the right, like the zigzag of the variable left-handers. They had excessive interhand differences, meaning either there was hardly any difference between the hands, or there was a lot of difference between the hands. And they had a greater inconsistency. So when they did the preference test, they swapped within the task. So there was much more of that. And of course, most of, if not all of them, had motor problems as well. So I concluded that the Handedness Profile was indeed a suitable instrument for assessing children in clinical practice. So since then, since 2003, we then moved to Berlin in 2005, and I then translated the Handedness Profile into German. And I've been researching in Germany mostly, or supervising some research. Recently, I authored a book called Zwischen Links- und Rechtshändigkeit, which is also explaining sort of the whole process or this practice-based approach. And I'm currently submitted, as I mentioned, a book on, it's quite a bit different, although it also presents the handedness profile, but it talks a lot about the typology and that kind of thing that I propose in the book. So what does the handedness profile look like now? This is the test kit that you get with standardized items that I actually assemble myself still with the help of my daughter. And there is a manual, a 100-page manual for administration, scoring, and interpreting the HP. There's assessment forms, tools for analysis, and luckily we have a digital scoring template as well. Part of the assessment forms is the parent questionnaire, which is very important because we need the background information on risk factors, pre, peri, and postnatal. We want to know, are they, because these could be indications for example, pathological left or right-handedness. We want to know, we want to have the information on familial handedness, left and right-handedness in the close and distant family. We want to see if there's any indications in the environment that a child was maybe switched from the left to the right. So these, that kind of questions, which is very important, and which sort of goes into the typology when we then try and figure out why this child is swapping hands and what type is most likely to be the reason for it. The first test, the preference test, consists of 24 items, and I've actually taken the 10 items of the Edinburgh Handedness Profile as items in this thing as well, with adapting 2 of them. Writing in the air, I've decided to do that to see, to maybe catch kids that have started to write with with a pen, with a write, but when they actually do it in the air, they use the left hand. But I always check if they also write their name with the right on, or with that hand on the paper. And the other adaptation is the hand broom and dustpan instead of the long broom, because I didn't want to get the kids getting up and then losing concentration and so on. So they stay seated. The other thing is that all of these items are each performed 4 times. So there's little games to make it interesting. And to be honest, the kids love it. The proficiency test, the trained proficiency test, is a combination of tracing and dotting. We know that both correlate highly with writing, and that's good. We want to see that. But of course, if you only use this as a proficiency test, you will probably not pick up your switched handers who might actually perform better with their non-dominant hand after having trained it. So, and you can also see here on the right, there is a checklist for all the proficiency tests to actually look at the quality of movement as well. So you've got another measure to compare that. Midline crossing is a little Lego game where you have 2 times 5 Lego pieces in the middle, in the left, on the right. So you have the opportunity to cross over. Well, normally you would cross over. If you're strongly dominant, you would cross over with your dominant hand 10 times. Then there's the untrained proficiency, which is the hammering and tapping test. I deliberately took both because hammering is a proximally controlled motor action, and tapping is distal, and we know that distal movement is more lateralized. Nevertheless, when you deal with kids with motor problems, they might have shoulder instabilities or whatever that interfere with a lot of the actions that they do. So it's very good to have both. And what they do, they hammer or they tap into this dot for 15 seconds as fast as they can. And there's a carbon paper underneath, so we can see the spread, and we actually count the hits as well. So we have a bit of an accuracy as well as speed combination. And then finally, there's the bimanual cooperation test. This is well known in the bimanual research. We know that adults, typically developed adults will, when they do this test with simultaneous drawing in different directions, the dominant hand will lead. It will have make nicer circles, better pressure, and it will also maintain the direction better than the non-dominant hand. And we know that if you increase the speed and you exclude vision, the difference between the hand actually becomes bigger. So that's why there's these different cycles. So then all of the tests, all of these 6 aspects, whereby this is one test, are then summarized thanks to the digital template into this profile. So this is now just taken here the normative profile of the explicit left-handers. But here you will have normally your laterality quotients. So you can immediately see what they are. These are your subtests: preference, untrained, trained, motor ability, skill, also untrained, trained, and then crossing midline bimanual coordination. And on the left, so here you've got the degrees of handedness on the right, which is actually age independent. And this is why a lot of therapists actually do the handedness profile also with adults, because it will show up nicely. And on this side, we have a proficiency level, and it very broadly categorized into average, borderline, and below average. Now, there's only normative data for 6-year-olds at this point, but it doesn't really matter because we just need a broad indication. If the child is older than 6 years or adult, one looks at whether the movement is efficient, flowing, fast, whatever, whether it's a bit laborious, or if it's really laborious and looks really strange, then you know it is below average. It's not, yeah. So let me show you a case study, and I want to show you a variable left-hander. This was a 9-year-old girl that didn't come to therapy. I just heard about her from a colleague, and I said I wanted to assess her, and that's her profile. She's doing very well at school. She's got no problems whatsoever. And the only weird thing about her is that she's got such an unusual, that her hand use is so unusual. So her functional hand preference, you can see this is the digital template. Her untrained unimanual, so the top is the unimanual tasks. She had no difference with the untrained tasks, and there was just a slight advantage, 8% more right on the trained tasks. The bimanual one, she was more right. So the untrained bimanual, she was 36% more right, and here she was 28% more right. But when you look at her consistency, which means, so here you see 4-0, she did it 4 times with the right hand and none with the left, so that's consistent, or 0-4 is also consistent. She has a lot of consistency across, so her overall consistency is actually 67%, which is great. Also typical for variable left-handers, that they do either something with the left or the right, but they also, she also has some where she does, where it doesn't matter which one she does. It's kind of weird. Overall, she is 18% more right-handed on the preference. Looking at the proficiency, trained proficiency skill, we can see that at first glance, the 2 bears look very similar, But she started with her left hand and she completed it in 63 seconds, achieving 70% of the maximum performance possible. With the right hand, she had the same time about and achieved 60%. So the way that I do the laterality quotient for the proficiency test, I take the maximum performance, work out the percentage, and then I subtract left from right. So in this case, she would be, left from right, she would be 10% better left. With the dotting, she was even better on the left. She had 15 seconds. She was faster and better with dotting compared to the right hand. So there was a clear left hand advantage here. Midline crossing, there she was really right-handed. She used the left hand twice in the center and 6 times ipsilaterally, but otherwise she crossed over with the right hand 4 times. So she's got a laterality quotient for midline crossing 40%, and if you add the midline, the items in the midline, she actually has 47% more right. Then here we've got the hammering and tapping ability. We have the left and right hand. You can see it's very, very close. In fact, here it's the right hand is slightly better, hammering being a proximal action, tapping slightly better left being a distal action. Also interesting, that would fit. And finally, her circles. Now we use different colors. The green is the preferred speed. The red is the fire brigade. It's a fast speed, and the blue is the police speed that goes very fast at night. So you can see that that's why there's different colors. And she is here with the mirror movements. She goes. They're very similar, slightly better on the left because the circles are slightly rounder. But when she has the parallel movements, she actually is able to keep direction better with the right hand than with the left hand. So if we look at it all together on the profile, the first thing we see is that she is average. She has got good motor skills, because this is what this now says here. She is in the average range. And on the right, she has here on the degrees, her preference is on the right. Her proficiency, well, the ability is right in the middle, no difference. But the train task, which is actually the one most that is most likely to be switched in left hand, as that is clearly on the left, and then the other things are on the right. So a therapist understanding this profile, knowing that this is a variable left-hander because of the things that I've said, will not switch this hand to the right. A therapist not knowing this might say, oh my God, this child is doing everything with the right except the drawing. She must be a right-hander. I must teach her to draw and write with the right hand, and she would switch her. So you can see that even a child that's got no problems could actually get problems if they are switched, if you don't really know what you have. So in conclusion, the handedness is a multidimensional standardized assessment that's been used in German-speaking countries. And recently, I've actually doing my 3rd online course with South Africans at the moment. I've translated everything into English. And it's been valuable in practice, but I also believe that it has a potential to be used in research, especially if the research focuses on the multidimensionality of handedness and has a more pragmatic research design. And that's it. Thank you very much.
We have time for one very quick question. You raised your hand first.
Hey, so Gareth Richards from Newcastle University. I'm just wondering, I wonder this sometimes, I hear this with, say, sports coaching and teachers in schools and things like this. Why is it considered a problem if kids switch hands and things like this? Because in many regards, it's actually quite advantageous. For instance, that if one hand gets tired, they can use the other one, or if they get an injury, they're not like incapacitated. Why is it actually it feels like if a child can use either hand, it's almost like, let's not keep that ability, let's wait for them to lose the ability for one hand. I just never really quite understood this.
Yeah, we know of a lot of so-called switched-handers that have got immense problems. Concentration, emotional, memory loss, or whatever, you name it. There's a wide range of problems. When they actually go back to the original hand, often these problems disappear. So we know that there's a direct link with that most people do not do well when they learn to write with their non-dominant hand. And I believe it is strongly related to the degree of handedness. I think that if you have a very mild degree, it will not be as bad, and maybe you cope with it, and maybe it is like you say. But those are not that, it's not that many people that can do that. And the majority of people are actually moderate and explicit handers, as I call them, and they will struggle. There's many case studies that look at that. The interesting thing is that not all switch handers that go back to the original hands are actually successful. Some actually, it was maybe so hard to learn to write with a non-dominant hand that it's even harder to relearn the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.